Hi all, welcome to the radio communications speech presented by Wesley, our CFI at Princeton Airport. Wesley is going to give a talk on some radio communications and important stuff relating to that. So some people may join throughout the presentation, and it's fine, I'll just let them in. If you guys have any questions throughout it, please feel free to type them in the chat, and when we get a break, we'll stop for some questions and maybe Wesley can answer them. Wesley, anything else to add?
I think that's pretty much it. So what I'm planning to do is just go over this presentation and then take questions afterwards. But if you guys want, we can kind of pause midway and do questions.
Yeah, we'll do questions at the end. But yeah, if you guys have questions, save them to the end, and Wesley will do a Q&A. And without further ado, Wesley, it's all you.
All right, cool. So yeah, let's get started with radio communications here. So the last topic we did last month was traffic patterns, right? So we're going to do radio communications this time. So we'll kind of go over like pre-flight planning, procedures, phraseology, all that good stuff, mainly geared towards towered airports. But what I want to do first, before we get all to that stuff, is show you guys an intro video here. Let's see. All right, so this clip is from one of those Smithsonian air disasters videos, like a reenactment of an incident in the past. So this is of the 1977 Tenerife accident. So there's a lot of factors that caused this to happen, but I just want to play maybe a minute or two of this just to show you a little bit and then talk about it afterwards. So let me just figure out how to share the audio here. All right, can you guys hear this? Okay, cool.
Los Rodeos Airport on the Spanish island of Tenerife is busier than it's ever been.
BA 783, hold short of the runway and stand by for taxi clearance.
With so many planes parked in the taxiways, the controllers instruct departing flights to taxi along the airport's only runway to get into position for takeoff. One of the planes waiting to get to Las Palmas is Pan Am Flight 1736. The Pan Am crew is ready to get back in the air, but they can't taxi to the runway. A KLM 747 has stopped in front of them to refuel.
Tenerife KLM 4805, you finished refueling, requesting clearance for startup.
He said, follow KLM down a runway, backtrack, make an exit to get around back of KLM. So that's what we were doing.
First Officer Bragg is unfamiliar with the airport. He checks a runway diagram to help find their turn.
Okay, that's this one right here.
Close ahead. It's going to put us on the taxiway.
As they taxi, they listen to the tower controller tell the KLM crew ahead of them what to do after departure.
You are clear to the Papa beacon. Climb to and maintain flight level 90. Right turn after takeoff.
Roger, clear to the Papa beacon. Flight level 90, right turn up. We are now at takeoff.
Okay, stand by for takeoff. I will call you.
And we're still taxiing down
The runway, Clipper 1736.
Papa Alpha 1736, report runway clear.
Okay, we'll report when we're clear.
All right, so let me just stop sharing the sound here. So yeah, I'll stop the video right there, but I'm not going to let it play out anymore after that. But basically, what happens afterwards, the two aircraft collide on the runway. So there's a lot of contributing factors to this accident here back in the 70s, but kind of the last straw over there, I don't know, maybe some of you caught it, the KLM never really got a takeoff clearance. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about, responding to clearances. So the tower controller was actually just issuing departure instructions afterwards, but KLM read it back and said, we are now at takeoff or something like that. So there never was a clearance for takeoff, which brings me to kind of the main points I want you to get from this webinar, which is standardized procedures and phraseology are key to safe flying, right? These all exist for a reason, so we really should be nice and familiar with them. So what we'll talk about in this webinar here, so the first thing we'll talk about selection and use of appropriate frequencies, so kind of dealing with pre-flight planning and actions. We'll then go over procedures, radio techniques, and kind of just phraseology to use. And then we're going to talk about how to deal with air traffic control clearances and instructions. And at the end, I'm just going to tie everything together and kind of go over an example flight scenario from Princeton to Trenton and back to Princeton, and just go over all the related radio communications involved with that there. All right, yeah, so the first thing we'll talk about is the pre-flight planning, so selecting using frequencies, right? So if we're familiar with 91.103, all about pre-flight action, right? It says, each pilot in command shall, before beginning a flight, become familiar with all available information concerning that flight, right? And they go on and list a couple of different things. So writing down radio frequencies is not actually one of the things they explicitly list, but it's definitely something we should be becoming familiar with beforehand. So we always want to plan ahead with regards to any frequencies that may be needed, right? So a couple places we can find these include chart supplements, sectional charts, other tools like that, what I'll show you. But let's say you're doing a cross country too, right? If you have a navlog, definitely write that stuff down on that sheet. So for example, right, in this VFR navigation log, there's this actually spot on the bottom right for airport frequencies for the departure and destination. So you can fill in for the ATIS, ground, tower, departure, all this other stuff. And there's also a section on top here for notes if you may need to write down any approach control frequencies, flight service station, anything like that there. If you're using an iPad with ForeFlight or anything like that, you can take advantage of the scratch pad feature. So you can kind of jot down any frequencies, stuff like that. Or if you have a notepad on the side, that'll be good too. So you're just trying to get it readily accessible to you in the flight, basically. So one of the primary places that you can find this information is your chart supplement publication, right? This used to be called the Airport Facility Directory, exactly what it sounds like. So over here, I have a screenshot of the chart supplement for Princeton. So I'm not going to go over how to decode every single line here, but I just want to point out the communication section, right? So what we've got is the communication says CTAP/Unicom is on 122.725, and then New York approach or departure control is on 132.8. So that's the frequencies we see there. They also provide us with a clearance delivery phone number, right? If you're flying IFR or something, it says for clearance delivery, contact New York approach at this phone number. And they also give the airport manager's number on top there. So there's just something else that's not within this section that kind of has to deal with communications. So right here on top, lights. If you ever have to activate the runway lights, your frequency is also provided right there, 123.05. So that was for Princeton, right? And if we take a look at the chart supplement for a tower airport such as Trenton here, right? Let's kind of decode this. So again, we see some of these same things, right? We have the airport manager number. They now give us weather data sources, right? There's your ASOS frequency, also with the phone number to call. So if you call that number, it will just kind of play back the ASOS there. Communications, so there's your CTAF frequency, ATIS, and Unicom's on 122.95. Philly approach or departure control is on 123.8. And then here are all your frequencies again. So there's tower on 120.7. Ground is going to be on 121.9, and clearance delivery is also on that same frequency. And again, something to mention here. So this is for Trenton. And for those of you who don't know yet, Trenton is class Delta, which means that the tower is going to be part-time. So whenever the tower is closed, the tower frequency 120.7 actually becomes CTAF frequency instead. So if we take a look at the tower frequency, they also tell us some additional information besides the frequency. So next to it, we have 1100 to 0300 Zulu, and then this symbol next to it. So basically, this is the operating hours of the tower in UTC time. And the symbol next to it here will indicate that this area observes daylight savings times. And then after that, we would have to adjust. So then it will become 10002 0200 Zulu. And again, that's in UTC and not local time there. So the other kind of main place you can find all your frequencies, right, is your sectional chart. So maybe some of you know how to read this, some of you don't, no worries. So we're just going to take a look at a couple pieces here. So this little data block right here is for Princeton. And we see Princeton 39 November. The only frequency that we see here listed is 122.725. And that frequency listed there is going to be your Unicom frequency. Because we see this little C in a circle next to it, this indicates that that's also the CTAF, the Common Traffic Advisory frequency there. So now let's take a look at a VOR, for example. So if you see the Solberg VOR here, 112.9, that's what you're going to dial in on your nav radio. But we also see an additional frequency on top. So it says 122.1R, which stands for receive. And then on the bottom here, it says Millville. So what's happening here, if you actually need to contact flight service station, let's say you want to open or close a flight plan, find out some information about the weather at your destination airport that's long to go up, something like that, right? What you would have to do in this case, you would actually have to transmit over 122.1, so that's going to go on your comms, and then you have to put 112.9 and turn up the volume there on your nav radio to actually listen for them. So the sectional chart can also provide information about like possible approach frequencies. So here's what it would look like, for example, near Allentown, right? This little box says, contact Allentown approach within 20 nautical miles above 3,000 on 124.45. However, if you're 3,000 and below, you're going to contact them on 119 or 0.65. So this is, again, is kind of general, but what happens sometimes if you try to contact them on their frequency, they may hand you off to a different controller, but still you're on good hands there. And kind of the last thing I wanted to bring up with the sectional charts that some of you may not be aware of just yet is the legend, and kind of the side of the sectional chart actually provides a lot of additional information. So what I'm going to do here is hop over to a Sky Vector. So here's our sectional chart for New York. And just to kind of go over, we're not going to look at this chart actually, we're just going to check out this side of the legend. So right over here is the legend, how to decode the sectional if you have a question about anything of that there. But what we're going to do, if we come down right here, it says control tower frequencies on the New York sectional chart. Airports with control towers are indicated on the face of the chart by the letters CT, followed by the primary VHF tower frequency, right? And it says information for each tower is listed in the table below. So basically right here, every towered airport, you have all your information with your frequency. So let's see, for example, Capital City Airport right here. It operates from 0700 to 2100, and this is going to be in local time. Tower is on 119.5, ground is on 121.9, and the ATIS frequency is 134.95. So this is a pretty good resource to check out as well. If we keep going down here, you're going to find additional frequencies. So here it says Class B, Class C, Tersa, and selected approach control frequencies. So they will also list a couple approach frequencies that you may talk to as well. So for example, New York class Bravo airspace, one of these frequencies you may end up talking to 128.55, right? And this is for the 231-270 headings off of LaGuardia there. So again, these are just kind of approximate, but usually what happens is if you try contacting one of them, they may switch you or hand you off to another controller who's responsible for the sector you're flying in there. And then the last thing I wanted to mention with frequencies on the sectional is right on the bottom here, anything to deal with special use airspace. So right here it says special use airspace on the New York sectional chart, and it breaks it down into all your different types of special use airspace. So let's see, for example, right here, restricted area 5001 Bravo. Altitude is from 4,000 to 8,000. Time of use, sunrise Friday to sunset Sunday. And the little symbol here says other times by NOTAM, and they'll provide that 48 hours in advance. If you ever have to contact someone about it, you would contact McGuire Approach, and their frequency right here is listed 126.475. So there's a lot of places on the sectional chart that you can get frequency information. So I just showed you some of them, but if you kind of dig around, you're going to find lots of different places. So let's take, for example, right here. It says caution, heavy jets operating at 2,000 and 3,000 within 15 nautical miles of McGuire, which is on 126.47. So maybe that's something you would want to monitor around over there. Cool, so we'll get back to the slides here, but the last thing I wanted to mention with the pre-flight planning at least is, so basically once you're in contact with controllers, they're going to be providing you with the frequency to reach the next controller, right? So you may have written something down on your, nav log or notes, whatever, during your pre-flight planning. But once you're in contact with the controller, they're going to be the one that's providing you with the next frequency. And something we're going to really emphasize is you should be reading back frequencies when instructed to change, right? And I'll talk about that a little bit more afterwards. So yeah, that kind of wraps up the pre-flight planning section. And what we're going to do now, we're going to move on to talking about radio technique, procedures, and phraseology, mainly at towered airports. So when we discuss radio technique, probably the most important thing to really get is understanding is the most important part of radio communications. So really making sure we're just not repeating back what the controller says with, without having a clue of what they actually want. We want to make sure both sides know what exactly is going on there. We also want to always acknowledge radio calls to the air traffic control with your aircraft call sign. So I'll talk about how to properly format those calls after. And it's a good idea to be brief and concise, right? You don't want to always kind of hog the frequency or clog it up. However, sometimes concise phraseology may not always be adequate to get your message across. So it's okay to sometimes just use whatever words are necessary there. So something that I can't stress enough, know what you're going to say before you say it. So we really want to make sure before you press that transmit button or push to talk on your yoke, know what you're going to say before. You kind of want to think about it, know what you're going to request, and before you actually press. Because what happens is if you press that button and you just kind of think, you stumble and mumble about, you know what you're going to say, you end up clogging the frequency there too. As we saw earlier, proper phraseology enhances safety, right? So what we'll talk about is kind of responding to clearances for takeoff and landings, right? That's going to be important. And the AIM, Aeronautical Information Manual, is helpful to learn what certain words or phrases mean, right? So I'm going to show you guys at the end, there's a certain chapter and section within the AIM that's going to be really, really helpful to kind of decipher different terms about radio communications and how to, kind of format your phraseology. This section also mentions this pilot controller glossary that the FAA published, and I'm just going to show this right here as well. So, all right, cool. So here's the pilot controller glossary, right? If we kind of zoom in, it says the purpose is this glossary was compiled to promote a common understanding of the terms used in the air traffic control system. It includes those terms which are intended for pilot controller communications. So this is kind of like a dictionary to whatever you need to know about phraseology, communications. If there's a word you're unsure about, it's probably in here. So if we scroll down, you're going to see it's kind of formatted in alphabetical order. So here's A. And for example, the word abeam, right? If you don't know what this means here, it says an aircraft is a beam, a fixed point or object when that fixed point or object is approximately 90 degrees to the right or left of the aircraft track. A beam indicates a general position rather than a precise point. So this is going to be a pretty good resource for everyone just to check out if there's any terms or phrases that you're unfamiliar with that an air traffic controller may say. So the last thing to mention here, so talking on the radio can be intimidating, even to experienced pilots. So it's totally okay to feel like that. But the most important thing is practice makes perfect, right? There are ways to really kind of practice effective radio communication, all this different phraseology, which we'll go over. So some additional things to talk about with technique, right? And some of these I already mentioned. So one, listen before you transmit. So before you press that push to talk, make sure no one else is talking on their frequency, right? You don't want to end up stepping on someone and blocking their call, and then again, more frequency congestion there. For example, now let's say you're tuning into a tower frequency. Wait a few seconds before you transmit, right? Just listen to see if it's busy or not, or if there's not too much going on, and then transmit. The next thing I said earlier, right? Think before transmitting. Really, really know what you're going to say before you say it. And if it's something like a really lengthy call that you're about to make, it's okay to write it down if you need to do so, especially in the kind of the beginning stages of learning radio technique. When you're talking to ATC, whenever you get that, receive an instruction or clearance from them, it's a good idea to also write that down just to avoid any confusion. So for example, even if it's something as simple as, they give me a heading or an altitude to turn, I'll just quickly jot that down just to make sure I know it. It's very easy to repeat it back because short-term memory works like that. But what happens is in a couple of seconds, it's probably gonna be gone. You may totally forget it there. So the next thing may seem kind of silly here. So after pressing the push to talk button, a slight pause may be necessary to be sure the first word is transmitted. So make sure that you actually have that button down, wait a second or so, and then actually transmit, because what happens is sometimes you may cut off that first word or so, and we may just hear traffic, 8 Mike Charlie taking off 28, and then that's it. We don't know what airport that is, right? So make sure you actually just wait just a second beforehand. And then if you're actually transmitting to a tower or approach, whatever, some kind of controller, after transmitting, just wait a few seconds before calling again. It's okay if the controller doesn't get back to you in 0.2 seconds. They may be kind of doing, coordinating with another controller, writing down some notes, or more likely, they're probably working ground or another frequency as well, right? They're probably busy. So just wait a few seconds, just be patient with them. They probably heard you and will get back to you. So something else to also be aware of is be alert to sound or lack of sounds in the receiver, right? So if you're on the frequency, you don't hear anything, that may be an indication here. So you want to check your volume, check you're on the right frequency, and also the transmit and receive indications, right? So here's what it would look like on the 430 that we have in the Princeton Flying School aircraft, right? So if I press that push to talk button, right, I should be seeing a TX appear on the top left. Whenever someone else is transmitting, you're going to see receive RX appear. If you see an RX and you press your push to talk, you're then stepping on someone else. So just try to make sure that the frequency again is silent before you try to transmit. Something else to be aware of that we've seen sometimes is a stuck mic, right? Maybe the microphone is stuck into some position or something like that, or you made your call and you forgot to lift your finger or something. So just double check to make sure that after you make your call, you release. And then if you look at your GPS right over here for the radios, at least, you should not see TX anymore. So that indicates that you're not transmitting. So we also want to be aware that we should be within the operating range of your equipment and ground station equipment. So it sounds kind of complicated, but we're just kind of reinforcing the line of sight concept, right? So for everyone who's trying to tune into Trent and ATIS on the ground at Princeton, that's kind of why, right? So just wait until you take off, gain some altitude first, because as we know, higher altitudes will increase the range of all those communications and we'll be able to receive those frequencies instead. So that's kind of the basics of radio technique. And what we're going to go over now is this kind of formula to developing your radio calls, right? This is not my thing, just found it somewhere, but it's called the 4 W's of radio communication. So we're going to kind of break it down like this here. So the first W, whom you're calling. So this could be Trenton Tower, New York Approach, Philly Approach, wherever it is. The second is going to be who you are. Skyhawk 29 Mike Charlie, Diamond 412 Papa Juliet, whatever it is. Third is where you are. So that's the third W, where you are. This could be 4 miles west of Princeton, or you'd say 2 miles south of Solberg VOR at 3,000. You give your altitude as well, right? And finally, the last W, right? What you want. So this could be, requesting flight following to Reading or inbound for 3 full stop taxi backs, whatever it is. So this is the general formula we want to kind of follow for radio communications, right? Whom you're calling, who you are, where you are, and what you want. So what we're going to try to do now, we're going to try to practice doing this for just 2 examples here. So the first situation here, you, November 493 Romeo Mike, are 5 miles east of Princeton at 5,500, looking for flight following from New York Approach to Brookhaven. So I'm not sure if it's possible if anybody can unmute themselves, but does anybody want to try this radio call here?
Yeah, I can unmute you guys. If there's a raise your hand function, if you guys want to.
Oh, cool. All right. Yeah, let's try that.
Over by the reactions.
All right, so doesn't look like anyone's going to try this call here, but I'll just kind of go over this for you guys. So what's going to happen? An example could be New York Approach, Skyhawk 493 Romeo Mike, 5 miles east of Princeton at 5,500, requesting flight following to Brookhaven. So we're going to break this down again using those 4 W's, right? First one, whom we're calling. So we're trying to talk to New York Approach, right? Second W, who we are, and that's Skyhawk 493 Romeo Mike. The third is where you are. So that's going to be 5 miles east of Princeton at 5,500. And then the last W, what you want. So this is the request, whatever you're trying to get here. So this could be requesting flight following to Brookhaven then. So I have another similar example. So this one is now you 172 Foxtrot Whiskey just departed Princeton off at 28 and are climbing through 2,000 looking for traffic advisories for a flight to Cape May. All right, does anyone want to try it this time? Let's see.
I'll give it a try.
All right, cool. I'm not sure who's talking right now, but let me see.
Rich.
Oh, okay. Hey, Rich. Yeah, let's see. So what would this call kind of be here?
New York Approach, Cessna 172, just departed Princeton at 2,000 feet, request flight following to Cape May.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a pretty good call right there, right? So you followed that 4W format. So first thing, you're trying to call New York Approach. That's whom you're calling. Second is who you are. So I think you said Cessna 172. I think it's just the call sign here. But
Yeah, and I left out the Foxtrot whiskey.
Exactly, you got it, right? So yeah, that's your registration there. And then you said just departed Princeton, climbing through 2000. So that works too, right? So the controller can kind of just look nearby and see if there's a target there climbing through that altitude. But what you could also say, since this example says we just departed Princeton 28, we could just say maybe you're 1 or 2 miles west of the field, something like that. But yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I would kind of say there too. All right. So moving on to aircraft call signs now. So this comes directly from the AIM, and I'll show you this section after. It says, the FAA desires to help student pilots in acquiring sufficient practical experience in the environment in which they will be required to operate. So this means that, you know, if you're doing your solo cross country or anything like that, you can actually say on your initial call up, Philadelphia approach, Skyhawk 172 Foxtrot Whiskey, student pilot. That's totally okay to say, you know, the controller will maybe a little more lenient, help you out a little more. But again, the FAA actually does encourage this in the AIM. So it's totally okay to kind of make that call there. But probably the more important thing to discuss with aircraft call signs here. So improper use of call signs can actually result in pilots executing a clearance intended for another aircraft. So one example, so on your initial contact with the controller, you always want to be stating your full call sign. So let's say I'm making my first call to New York approach to get flight following. If I just say New York approach through Romeo Mike, they're not going to have any clue who that is, right? We want to make sure we're saying New York approach, Skyhawk 493 Romeo Mike. And after that, you know, after you get your clearance from the Bravo or whatever you're requesting, right, then it's okay. They may abbreviate as well, November 3 Romeo Mike or 3 Romeo Mike, whatever it is, right? The other situation is if there's other aircraft on the frequency with similar call signs, right? If there's 298 Mike Charlie, and then if there's 368 Mike Charlie, for example, on the frequency, right? So you want to make sure you're exercising extra care to not inadvertently execute a clearance for another aircraft. And, you know, if you're ever unsure, just ask, double check, right? You never want to try to guess to see who that was for. Just always double check, say again to the controller, right? So unfortunately, that always doesn't happen, and mistakes have taken place in the past. So I'm going to show you guys a little bit of this video here as well, right? So I think the beginning kind of has like an explanation. So what I'm going to do here is share my screen again, share the sound. Let's see if this plays. Okay, so I'll let you guys kind of read it. So it says a Southwest and a Delta aircraft basically have similar call signs. So Southwest 3828 and Delta 1328. And this was at Chicago Midway, and it said they had a close call when both aircraft started to roll at once. And this is mainly because of similar call signs. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to let this play here. You guys can kind of watch what's going on. So hopefully the audio is working here. There's nothing playing just yet.
Delta 1328, be advised, similar call sign on frequency is Southwest 3828, cross runway 31 center and runway 31 left. Taxi via Yankee to 4 right.
Clear to cross 31 center and 31 left, Yankee to 4 right, Delta 1328, will be aware.
Southwest 3828, be advised, similar call sign on frequency is Delta 1328. And once you approach 31 right, as you're crossing it, you can switch over to power. Have a good day.
All right, we'll be listening up for that, and we'll switch over to tower to approach 31 right, Southwest 320.
So I'm just going to stop it quickly. So just from that, the ground controller already warned them. They said, okay, look, there's someone else with a similar call sign. So just like that, they should be kind of something's turning on. They say, okay, we're going to pay extra attention now just to make sure we're not incorrectly reading back to clearance. But all right, let's continue.
1828 Midway Tower, traffic holding position on the cross runway, traffic on a 4-mile funnel, lands a parallel, and traffic runway 10-mile funnel, 48, line of point.
4 right, 1328.
28 Midway Tower, runway 31 center, line up and wait, don't plan on stopping.
31 center, line of point, Southwest 3828.
Traffic holding position on the cross runway, traffic on a 3-mile funnel for the cross runway, no delay please, turn left heading 250, runway 31 center, clear for takeoff, the wind 060 at 9er. Two call 1 South 3828, verify no delay, left to 250, 31 center, clear for takeoff.
Takeoff 31 center, no delay, heading 250, Southwest 3828.
Stop.
1328, reporting. Wait, stopping.
Make make the right turn onto taxiway Delta. Right turn to Delta, hold short runway 4 right.
Delta, hold short 4 right, Southwest 3828.
Keep answering for each other. It's Southwest 3828 and Delta 1328. Southwest 3828, make the right turn onto Golf, back taxi runway 31 center.
Right turn on Golf, back taxi 31 center, we're in.
All right, so I'll stop the video right there. So kind of the main thing to get from this is that similar call signs idea, right? So just making sure you're really listening carefully to not incorrectly execute the wrong clearance, right? So what happened was both those guys read back the Southwest takeoff clearance at the same time, and they both started rolling on crossing runways there. But something else that I think it's important to mention that the video didn't talk about, I'm not sure if this is just because of the live ATC audio from where they got it from, but from what I was hearing, every time the controller was given an instruction, I couldn't hear that first word. It was just kind of the flight number, 1328 or 3828, maybe half of the word Delta or Southwest was cut off or something like that. So again, that's emphasizing the importance of make sure you just pause for a second before you actually transmit. So press the button, pause for just a second, and then talk, right? So you're, again, making sure that nothing is cut off there. So that's kind of wrapping it up on the radio technique and aircraft call signs. And what we'll discuss now is just the phraseology portion, right? So we kind of talked about the formula, right? The 4W. So now how do we actually kind of use this aviation lingo, I guess you could say, right? So the first thing to discuss is the phonetic alphabet. So we use the phonetic alphabet when identifying aircraft during contact with ATC facilities, right? So when I'm calling Trenton Tower, I'm not saying Trenton Tower N493RM, right? I'm saying Skyhawk 493 Romeo Mike, using the phonetic alphabet there. And we can also use the phonetic alphabet for single letters, or if there's any time we have to spell out a group of letters or difficult words when it's like hard to hear, for example, right? But you know, if we just have to say Roger, we don't have to say Romeo, Oscar, Golf, Echo, Romeo. Just say Roger. That's all good. So figures now, right? So any numbers or figures indicating hundreds and thousands. So for example, ceiling heights and upper wind levels up to 9,900 shall be spoken in accordance with the following. So we say 500 and we say 3,500 rather than 3,500. And it says numbers above 9,900 shall be spoken by separating the digits preceding the word thousand. So for example, 13000, I'm not going to say climbing to 13,000, we'd actually say 13,000 there. If we ever have to transmit an airway or jet route numbers, we would say, instead of V16, we'd say Victor 16, and then J533. But all other numbers should be transmitted by pronouncing each digit. So for example, if you are in the pattern of Princeton, we are not going to say Princeton traffic, 54 uniform, left crosswind, 28 Princeton, right? We want to make sure we're actually separating those digits. So it would be Princeton traffic, Skyhawk 54 uniform, left crosswind, runway 28 Princeton. And anytime we have to maybe read back our frequency, we kind of pronounce that decimal with the word point, right? So we'd say 122.72 or 123.8. So when we kind of discuss altitudes in flight levels, right? So for any altitude that's up to but not including 18,000 feet MSL, we state the separate digits of the thousands plus the hundreds if appropriate, right? So 1,000 rather than 11,000, and instead of 5,500, we would say 5,500. And then anytime, if you know anyone here is flying at and above 18,000 feet MSL, we use the words flight level, followed by the separate digits of the flight level, right? So 19,000 feet then becomes flight level 190 or 27,500. Instead of that, we would say flight level 275. But assuming that most of you are in 172s here or anything, something like that, we won't be climbing up there anyway. So something to kind of consider here though with altitudes and flight levels and just overall radio communications is using the words 2 and 4. So if I said to the controller, climbing for 5,000, they, for some reason, may interpret that as 45,000 feet. Or if I say climbing to 5,000, climbing to 5,000, that's maybe interpreted as 25,000 feet, all right? So instead, what you want to say is just climbing 5,000. An example of this at like a non-towered airport, this doesn't have to do with altitudes or flight levels, but still just using the words 2 or 4. If I make my call 10 miles that and I say inbound to 8, this may be interpreted as I am inbound to runway 28. So instead, what you want to say is inbound landing runway 28 or something of that sort, right? Just kind of avoiding the usage of the words to and for is going to be important just to avoid any confusion there. So when we transmit directions, right, it says the 3 digits of bearings, courses, headings, or any wind directions, those are in magnetic, right? And the word true must be added if we are talking about true, right? So the magnetic course 010, that's how we would say it. But if it's a true course over the radio, we would say 010 true. If we had wind direction from 220, we would say wind 220 and then followed by the wind velocity there. So anytime we're transmitting speeds or controllers telling us the speeds, we separate digits of the speed followed by the word knots. So instead of saying 110 knots, we would say 110. Instead of saying we're going 250 knots, we are 250 knots, right? Sometimes controllers will actually omit the word knots, and they'll just kind of just say the digits of the speed when they're trying to get you at just speed there. So finally, last thing to talk about phraseology is time, right? So we should know that the FAA uses Coordinated Universal Time, UTC time, for all operations, right? We also call that Zulu. If we ever have to use local time, we use the word local or the time zone equivalent over radio communications, right? So for example here, 0930 UTC, this would be 0930, or if you want to express it in local, it could be 0130 Pacific or local. And again, we're converting that. So this chart here, you can find it in the AIM Aeronautical Information Manual. I'll show you guys where to find it, but this is how to convert from that standard time here to Coordinated Universal Time. So for example, 10 a.m. today, right? 10 a.m. today. There's also a note for daylight time, subtract 1 hour. So that's what we're in right now. So if it was standard time, 10 a.m. Would be 1500 UTC, but since it's daylight savings, it's actually 1400 UTC. So that kind of wraps up the radio technique, phraseology, and procedures portion. And what we're going to do is now discuss how to deal with air traffic control, and kind of responding to clearances and all their different kinds of instructions, right? So the kind of formula to deal with this is we just have to acknowledge their clearance and instruction by repeating the key points, and then we say our call sign. So for example, Trenton Tower may tell us Skyhawk 2 Foxtrot Whiskey, join right down runway 34. All we have to respond with is, all right, join right down runway 34, Skyhawk 2 Foxtrot Whiskey. So again, we're just saying their instruction back, repeating it right back, followed by our call sign there. Something else to also consider, we always have to read back any hold short instructions, right? The hold short line. So if Trenton Tower said Skyhawk 9 Whiskey Romeo, runway 34, taxi via Hotel, Foxtrot Echo, hold short runway 24, the formula again, we repeat those instructions followed by the call sign, and we're making sure we read back the hold short, right? So we'd say, all right, runway 34, taxi via Hotel, Foxtrot Echo, hold short runway 24, Skyhawk 9 Whiskey Romeo. So this was tying back to what we talked about earlier with the Tenerife accident, right? You must read back all clearances. So we need a clearance to take off and land and cross any runways, right? And whenever we get that, we have to read it back. So if Trenton Tower tells us Skyhawk 54 uniform, runway 34, clear to land, we can just reply, clear to land, runway 34 at 54 uniform, right? Just making sure we read back all clearances. And as a general rule, we want to try to always repeat altitudes, headings, and altimeter. So just kind of numbers are given, right? So let's say, you're in contact with New York Approach. They say Skyhawk 54 uniform, maintain VFR out of below 4,500, Newark altimeter 3014. And we just, again, repeat that right back. Maintain VFR out of below 4,500, altimeter 3014, Skyhawk 54 uniform. So hopefully you guys can see the pattern so far. So all it is we're repeating their instruction followed by the call signs. That's kind of just the general formula there for responding to air traffic control clearances and instructions. So I brought this up a little bit before, but I want to kind of talk about this more. So switching frequencies. So whenever we're advised to change frequencies, we want to make sure you're reading back and acknowledging that instruction and then changing, right? So if New York Approach tells us Skyhawk 8 Mike Charlie, contact New York Approach on 128.55, our readback can be as simple as 128.55 Skyhawk 8 Mike Charlie. So we actually don't have to state the facility name in that. It's okay too if you want to, but the readback can be nice and simple, right? We can just say the frequency there. So the importance of this is here, right? If we select this new frequency without actually reading back to the controller or acknowledging it, then their workload is increased, right? Because they have no way of knowing if we've actually received that instruction, and they may assume we've had like a radio communication failure or something like that. So before you change frequencies, make sure you actually read it back. And something else I also want to bring up here, right? Pause for maybe a second or two before you change. Because sometimes maybe you may have read that frequency back incorrectly. They'll try to correct you there before you get on. So however, if you switch to the wrong frequency and there's no response or something, just go right back to where you were beforehand. So anytime a clearance or instruction is blocked or not understood, ask the controller to say again, right? We never want to guess or ignore the call, right? Just double check who that was for. You can just say again for Mike Charlie. And then something also to note, once we've accepted an ATC clearance or instruction, we cannot deviate from it unless it is an emergency situation, right? I'm not going to go into, filing reports or anything, but that's just something for us to know there. And the last thing I want to bring up here with ATC clearance and instructions, right? If we cannot accept a clearance from ATC, let's say they tell us that, maintain 120 knots until half-mile final and we're in a 152. We would just have to advise them of that reason and obtain a new clearance, right? So always want to make sure, do not accept any clearance which we are unable to perform. You are the PIC, not the air traffic controller. Cool. So that pretty much is everything I wanted to discuss with the radio communications. So what we're going to do now, we're going to try to tie all this information together into kind of planning an example flight. So the scenario here is you, Skyhawk 2908 Mike Charlie, will be flying from Princeton to Trenton for 3 full-stop taxi-back landings, followed by a VFR departure back to Princeton. And what's going to happen is after initially departing Princeton, you plan to fly west and climb to 3,000 before contacting the appropriate controller. So if we take a look at our sectional, it's going to kind of look like this, right? We're going to depart straight out from 208, head west, climb to 3,000, and then once we contact the appropriate controller, we're then going to turn inbound towards Trenton for our laps in the pattern. So if we remember, all this starts with pre-flight planning, right? So on the ground, we should already have an idea of those frequencies you want to be communicating on. So you should be checking that chart supplement and sectional chart to determine any frequencies and have them written down on an e-board, iPad, or also I'll show you on the taxiway diagram, right? So here's our sectional, right? And for Trenton, we can kind of decode some of this information. So CT control towers on 120.7. The star here indicates that this is a part-time tower, and this is also the common traffic advisory frequency. This is denoted by the C there. ATIS is on 126.775, and the only other frequency that I see here is 122.95, and that's going to be your Unicom frequency. Now, if I check my chart supplements, right, this is the same thing I was showing you guys earlier, right? So here's Trenton Mercer, and here's your communications section, right? So there's your CTAF, ATIS, Unicom. They have Philly approach and departures on 123.8. There's your tower frequency and ground and clearance delivery frequencies that you may need as well, right? So I just kind of have this written down somewhere. Something else that you should always be bringing with you or have accessible is your airport diagram with your taxiways and runways, right? And if we take a look at the top left here, they also have your frequencies listed. So there's your ATIS, there's your tower with the star, indicates part-time, right? Ground control and clearance delivery also sharing the same frequency. So that's kind of what I would focus on for the frequencies, at least. There's much more to pre-flight planning, as we know, right? 91, 103. But in terms of frequencies, just again, want to be aware of who I'd be contacting there. I didn't worry about, any approach or flight following frequencies, right? This is a nice short flight, and Trenton's class Delta, right? They don't have an associated approach controller there. So what I would do now, after getting in the airplane, starting that engine, I want to make sure I set up my radios before I actually start taxiing, right? So this assumes that we're in one of the flying school planes, 2 radios, right? So in COM 1, in the active, I would have Princeton CTAF, right? 122.725. And in the standby, I would put the Trenton tower frequency, 120.7. Now my COM 2, I would actually put the Trenton ATIS, right? 126.77. So I can tune to that later. So I know we've kind of been focusing on towered airport communications and how to deal with that stuff, but here are just some example calls you could make when you're departing Princeton and then climbing through, clearing the pattern and all that. But again, FAA doesn't have any at least published standardized phraseology for at least this is, so we'll just kind of go over this. So departing Princeton, you could say Princeton traffic, Skyhawk 8 Mike Charlie, departing runway 28, straight out departure to the west of Princeton. So that could work there. And now let's say you're clearing the pattern, climbing through 1200, you could say Princeton traffic, Skyhawk 8 Mike Charlie, 2 miles west of the field, climbing through 1200, departing to the west of Princeton. So if we remember, if anyone was at the previous Zoom meeting, so there's only 2 ways that the FAA has to depart the pattern, straight out or 45-degree turn in the direction of the pattern, right? So let's say, all right, I'm clear of the pattern. I'm at 3000. I'm just west of Princeton right now. So the first thing I would do is use COM2 and switch to Trenton ATIS and listen for any information, right? Jot down if it's ATIS Alpha, information Bravo, whatever it is, and write down any information I may need. So when they're giving me the altimeter, for example, they say altimeter 3014. When I'm writing this down, I'm not actually spelling out the word altimeter, right? I could just be writing 3014, A3014. Or for example, when they're giving me the wind, I'm not going to spell out WIND. I'm just going to kind of abbreviate it in more like a METAR or TAP format there, just to make my life easier, make it a little quicker, right? And then what I would do, I would use COM1, switch to the Trenton Tower frequency, and then listen to the frequency, just like we talked about. We're not going to immediately make a call without listening, right? Just see if the frequency is busy or not. And we also want to make sure we're not stepping on anyone else before we transmit, right? So we'll talk about this initial contact now. So initial contact. So if the frequency is busy, you can just try to actually just get the controller's attention. So you can just say Trenton Tower, Skyhawk 2908 Mike Charlie, and they'll respond back, Skyhawk 2908 Mike Charlie, Trenton Tower. And I want you guys to notice that I'm using my full call sign here on the initial contact, right? I'm not abbreviating, just like we talked about earlier. So however, for this initial contact, if it's not too busy, maybe they're just like one guy in the pattern or there's no one else there at all, we can try to have your initial call include your actual request. So for example, I could say, Trenton Tower, Skyhawk 298 Mike Charlie is 5 miles west of Princeton at 3000 with information Delta inbound for 3 full stop taxi backs. So again, we're still following that formula of the 4 W's, right? First thing, whom I'm calling, which is going to be Trenton Tower. Second W is who you are, Skyhawk 2908 Mike Charlie. Third W is where you are. So we are 5 miles west of Princeton at 3000. And the last W, what you want. We're inbound for 3 full stop taxi backs, right? So Trenton could reply to you, Skyhawk 8 Mike Charlie, enter the right downwind runway 34. And since we know this is a class Delta, we don't need a clearance or anything. We just have to get those 2-way radios. And right there, we do have 2-way radio communication, right? So we would respond back with enter the right downwind runway 348 Mike Charlie, right? So notice here, I'm abbreviating, which is okay after that initial contact. And I'm still following the formula, right? I'm just repeating the instruction followed by the call sign. So now let's say I'm on downwind, right? The controller may actually provide additional instructions before you get your landing clearance. And one of those most common instructions is extend downwind, I'll call your base. So if the pattern's really busy, they've got maybe 4 or 5 guys just practicing touch and goes or full stop taxi backs at Trenton, the tower controller may say extend downwind, I'll call your base. And that's just saying, all right, keep flying downwind. The tower controller will let you know when to turn that base. And all you have to do is, again, just repeat the instruction back followed by your call sign. All right, extend downwind, you call our base, 8 Mike Charlie. That could work. However, if none of that's there, he'll clear your land. So you can say, he'll say 8 Mike Charlie, wind 320 at 6, runway 34, clear to land. And you can respond with clear to land, runway 34, 8 Mike Charlie. So notice here, I'm not repeating the wind. So that's something that we don't have to repeat there. So just remember the important thing is reading back any clearances, right? You have to be clear to land there. So let's say, all right, we landed, we're rolling out now. Tower would say November 8 Mike Charlie, make the next right on Foxtrot, runway 34, taxi via Foxtrot Echo. And again, we're just going to repeat that instruction right back, followed by our abbreviated call sign. We'd say next right on Foxtrot, runway 34, taxi via Foxtrot Echo, 8 Mike Charlie. So something else to note here. So I know that it says Trenton Tower is making this call. So usually what happens though, they'll just keep us on the same frequency if we're just going to be doing full stop taxi backs there. So, all right, let's say we taxi back, we're holding short of runway 34 before the hold short line, completed your pre-takeoff checklist, briefing and all that stuff, and you're ready for departure to stay in the pattern. So Trenton Tower should already have your request, right? So all you have to say is Trenton Tower, 8 Mike Charlie is holding short of runway 34, ready for departure. Still following the 4 W's, right? Whom we're calling, who we are, where we are, and what we want, right? Trenton Towers then is going to clear you for takeoff if there's no other traffic, right? They'd say November 8 Mike Charlie, runway 34 clear for takeoff, make right traffic, report midfield downwind. So here they gave us some additional instructions. And again, we're just repeating that straight back, followed by our call sign. So we'd say runway 34 clear for takeoff, make right traffic, report right midfield downwind, 8 Mike Charlie, right? So here they're telling us we're not going to make our standard left turns, right? We're going to do right traffic, and they want us to report midfield downwind as well. So now let's say, all right, we did our 3 full stop taxi backs. We're holding short now, ready to go back to Princeton, right? So what's usually helpful is just to give the direction we want to fly in. So we can just say departure to the northeast. But if the the airport's nearby, maybe the controller is familiar with it, we can just say departure back to Princeton. So the call could be Trenton Tower, 8 Mike Charlie, holding short of runway 34, ready for departure to the northeast. And then Tower will then clear for takeoff, right? Skyhawk 8 Mike Charlie, runway 34, clear for takeoff, departure to the northeast, approved. And then again, we're just reading it right back. All you got to do is just read back what he said, followed by your call sign. So it could be runway 34, clear for takeoff, departure to the northeast, approved, 8 Mike Charlie. And that's it. So let's say now you're outside of the Class Delta airspace at Trenton. What you're going to do now, you're going to switch back to the Princeton CTAF, which should hopefully still be on that COM1 standby, and proceed with your radio calls, right? So an example of something you could say when you're maybe 10 miles out or something: Princeton traffic, Skyhawk 8 Mike Charlie, 7 miles southwest of the field at 2,500, inbound landing runway 28 Princeton, right? And then as you get closer, you continue making all of your other calls, join the 45 and all your pattern stuff, right? So that's pretty much the example scenario I wanted to go over there with the radio communications. And as I mentioned before, there's just some additional resources I want to check out with you guys. So the first one is the AIM here, Chapter 4, Section 2. I talked about this a little bit earlier, right? So this is radio communications, phraseology, and techniques. So we're just going to open this up here. And this is pretty much everything I was talking about before, right? General radio technique, right? Listen before you transmit. Think before keying a transmitter and all that stuff. And then they go over the important stuff, right? Contact procedures, how to do your initial contact, all those other kind of calls, right? Compliance with frequency changes, precautions in the use of aircraft call signs. We have the student pilot radio identification, which we discussed, right? And they also talk about how to call ground stations, right? What their actual call sign is. So if I wanted to call a flight service station, I wouldn't say Millville Flight Service Station. I would actually use Millville Radio. Here's your phonetic alphabet, figures, altitudes, all this other stuff we talked about. So this is going to be an important resource for everyone to also check out if you want to learn about radio communications, or if you already have your license, kind of a refresher, good too, right? So I know we mainly focused on towered airport stuff. That's usually where we see students have the most trouble with communications, but we are operating out of Princeton, right, which is non-towered. So the FAA has published an advisory circular, 9066 Bravo, non-towered airport flight operations. This is going to be, again, essential reading for everybody operating out of a non-towered airport. I think there's actually a copy of this on the table at the lounge downstairs. Not 100% sure if it's still there, but this is important here, right? So if we zoom in, it says, this advisory circular calls attention to regulatory requirements, recommended operations, and communications procedures for operating at an airport without a control tower, and recommends traffic patterns, communications phraseology, and operational procedures. So all this other stuff. So any questions about non-towered operations probably going to be answered in here. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit and show you. So there's operating practices, and section 10 here, communication procedures. So it says the following information is intended to supplement the aeronautical information manual, right? So they give you recommended practices here, information provided by Unicom, how to self-announce your position or intentions, like, you know, if you have questions about how to make that call when you're 10 miles out or over the field and all that stuff. They say, don't use the phrase any traffic in the area, please advise. They talk about confusing language, like we mentioned earlier, right? Avoid using the words to and for. They also even give insight on something like practice instrument approaches in VMC conditions. You know, guys sometimes doing straight-in approaches, right? So this is going to be a pretty good resource too. And it's also good for traffic pattern stuff, right? If you want to review your traffic pattern entries, departures, kind of all the different legs, right? So really, really good document for non-towered operations. And then the last resource here I wanted to share with you guys. So AOPA has this online course. It's called Say It Right, Mastering Radio Communications. So here it is. all the different things you're going to learn. And oh, look, FAA wings eligible, accident forgiveness eligible. So it says wings credits are submitted to FAA once a week and will appear on your FAA transcript shortly thereafter. So cool. You're going to learn stuff and get wings credits. So this is pretty good. So it says you're going to learn about best practices before pressing the push to talk, avoiding pitfalls of ineffective communication, techniques and tips. And here again, they talk about the essence of the 4 W's, right? And they also go over communication at towered and non-towered airports and all this other good stuff. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of this. So if I press take the course, hopefully this will take me right to the page. All right, let's see. Perfect, here we go. So here's the little page, right? Got a bunch of different subsections and modules, right? So towered airport operations, for example, let's click on this, see what it has for us. So there's different pages. So we have radio setup, listening to ATIS, initial call up, runway incursions, ground tips, departure, all this other stuff. And if we kind of go through, right, they give you examples, even something as simple as setting up radios, or let's see, listening to ATIS, they kind of brief you on all these different things. So this is going to be a pretty good online course to go over as well, right? Just to get you up to date with radio communications, kind of learning about this stuff. And again, you will get wings credit for doing this course. So this is pretty solid as well. But other than that, pretty much wraps up the presentation there. So hopefully you guys were able to kind of refresh yourselves, learn some stuff. So other than that, any questions for me there? So we can kind of open this up to a discussion here.
I do have one question, Wesley. Thank you. So in our previous example where you had departed Trenton and you were headed back to Princeton, you departed to the Northeast. Do you need to contact Trenton Tower when you're switching frequencies and let them know?
That's a good question here. So I see some people do that, but technically you actually don't have to do that. So as long as you're clear, you're free to switch back. So you know, it's not a class Bravo or anything like that, but yeah, you actually don't have to let them know. I mean, you could if you wanted to, you could if you're switching, but technically we don't have to.
Okay.
All right, let's see here. Okay, so Bill says, I hear a number of experimental aircraft announce themselves as experimental versus the specific airplane type. Is that proper? So again, I would consult that advisory circular 9066 Bravo for any kind of questions on those non-tower communications. But what I would probably myself, I think I would understand how they're kind of going for experimental, because especially if it's an aircraft type that not many people are familiar with, it may be a little more useful to identify yourself as experimental. But again, this is like, 152 versus 172 again, not something not too big of a deal, but I would probably find an answer somewhere in the advisory circular here. So 9066 Bravo is going to be your key to that. All right, does anybody else have any questions here? Anything we talked about with the communications? All right, let's see. Does anyone have experience with Plain English, the app-based aviation radio simulator, and is it worth the cost? Unfortunately, I have no experience with that. I'm not really sure, but I've heard some people use it and had success, so maybe it's a good tool. I'll have to look into that too to use with my students, but I'm not 100% sure. But anybody else here, has anyone used this app, Plain English? All right, guess not. Okay, yeah, any other questions here? Well, okay, here's something though. If you guys do kind of want to get experience listening, and another option besides Plain English is Live ATC. So that's a pretty good website too. They just kind of have like a direct feed of the ATC frequency and you kind of listen from home. So if you want, you can go listen to JFK Tower right now, or you can go listen to Trenton Tower, see whatever they're saying. So another kind of useful tool to just see what people are saying, how they're communicating and applying this language here. All right, cool. Andrew said, can you explain Tersa contact phrasing? So to be honest, I've never really dealt with that before. But what I kind of think of it as is an optional class Charlie. So that's kind of how I've always thought of it. Tersa is optional class C airspace. So I would, again, just kind of communicate it probably the same way as I usually do with Class C. But again, it's just optional to whoever's participating there. So yeah, if you don't want to use it, you don't have to. But yeah, it's optional Class C. I'd probably communicate the same way then.
Yeah, and if you guys have any other ideas or topics that we'd like Wesley or someone else at the airport to go over in one of these webinar events, drop them in the chat. Come by the airport. Come, just ask a few questions. Say something to the counter person, and we'll do our best to cover some other topics. Are there any more questions for tonight? Going once. Going twice. All right. Yeah. Great job, Wesley.
Yeah, thanks, James. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Yeah.